What I wanted to do today was not necessarily give you a really dry dissertation on tobacco use and all of this, but I wanted to make this more of a storytelling about tobacco use and some tobacco facts. Because actually tobacco does affect all of us. Even if you aren't a user, being exposed to tobacco smoke has the same effects on your body as if you were smoking the cigarette. So we do know that smoking is the #1 preventable cause of illness and death in this country. And in fact, right now, it is the #1 preventable cause of death and illness, and it's about 440,000 deaths a year. Now, if you're like me, those kind of numbers, you know, when you get paid in pennies, talking about big numbers don't make a lot of sense. So let me put that in perspective for you. Do you remember where you were on 9/11? And when you heard how many people died on 9/11 and how shocked we were that over 3,000 people died that day? This is the equivalent of a 9/11 every other day. This is the equivalent of 3 jumbo jets going up into the air and crashing into each other, completely filled every day. But we don't see the same kind of outrage that we did with 9/11 with this, because it's very insidious and it's very quiet. And we have the tobacco companies, of course, that are putting a lot of money into hiding these things. But I want y'all to just kind of keep that in mind. It is involved in all sorts of cancers. Most people think of lung cancer when they think of smoking, but it's involved in bladder cancer, kidney cancers, pancreas. Kidney and bladder cancers especially are affected by nicotine and the toxins that come out of the cigarette smoke. And we always talk about this when we're talking with other people, that alcohol causes more deaths than tobacco causes more deaths than alcohol, cocaine, crack, heroin, homicides, suicides, car accidents, fires, and AIDS combined each year. And so I wanted just to, why that is. Everybody knows it's the smoke, but what is it about the smoke that's so bad? Well, let's look what these, there are 4,000 chemicals in the smoke, but look at these. Do you know benzene? If you are a truck driver that transports benzene, they make you get in a full environmental suit with respirator, completely covered, just because if there's potentially a drop or two that drops out of the benzene transfer, that's how toxic it is. And yet, tobacco smoke has it that everybody can breathe. It's just real interesting. Ammonia, did you know that they soak the leaves into ammonia to make the tobacco burn faster? That's the purpose of that. So if it burns faster, it burns hotter, it delivers more nicotine and more tar into the lungs. But how many of you thought they actually wash the tobacco leaves? That would be about the closest they come to watching the tobacco leaves, is when they soak it in the ammonia. Disgusting, isn't it? I have a confession to make. The reason why I got into this, probably led to it, is I'm an ex-user myself. And I was, started at 14 and whatnot. And so I give these talks and I think about how smart I was at 14, huh? But I want to talk a little bit about secondhand smoke. If you are not a user, you're not immune to what goes on with tobacco smoke if you're in the same room with someone. When we talk about secondhand smoke and clean air laws, we are having a struggle in the state passing a clean air law. It keeps going to committee, and there's a great possibility that it will die again this year, and we will not have it in Michigan. But one of the things I always encourage people to think about, having a smoking section and a non-smoking section is like having a peeing and a non-peeing section in the pool. It's exactly the same thing. Now, if we knew that there was a peeing section in the pool, how many of you are going to jump in the pool? My thoughts exactly. Well, that's exactly what it's like with secondhand smoke. We've got 2 types of smoke. In fact, in secondhand smoke, most of the smoke is out in the environment. We've got the side stream smoke, which is the stuff that when they're just sitting there holding the cigarette that's coming off the end of the cigarette. But then there's mainstream smoke. Remember, when they inhale, they exhale it too, and it comes out and goes into everybody. And in fact, I'm going to tell you a little story. I went bowling. I'm so embarrassed to tell you this story because I was a terrible bowler, and I should tell you I had 13 gutter balls in a row. It was a very embarrassing event. But I was there for an hour and a half with non-smokers. and we weren't near any smokers. And when I walked out after an hour and a half, I could tell I smelled like smoke. I happened to have my carbon monoxide monitor in my car, so I took a CO reading just to see, because remember, I wasn't anywhere near smokers. I had a 21 parts per million CO reading, which meant that in the literature, I had just had a cigarette. And that was exposure to other people's smoke. I had inhaled that much carbon monoxide. So I know a lot of people like to think that being around cigarette smoke doesn't really bother them, but it really does. Everything that they inhale and all those toxins that we talk to them about when they're smoking cigarettes, exposure to secondhand smoke, you are also getting that if you're sitting there. Of course, we know that it is a human carcinogen. Actually, of the 4,000 things that are in tobacco smoke, 43 of them are identified as carcinogenic materials. And just being around secondhand smoke can cause breathing problems, can reduce lung function, can cause lung infections, and it can increase severity of asthma attacks in asthmatics. In fact, one of the things that we see at U of M Hospital are children who are asthmatic, and parents go to give them a hug. They're not even smoking. They're just giving them a hug, but the residue of the tobacco smoke from having just had a cigarette triggers an asthma attack. Because that material, think about it, tar, all that stuff, lands on something, and their body is one of the things. Some research that just came out recently is secondhand smoke may increase the risk of breast cancer, that there are 20 chemicals that are in smoke that does cause cancer or breast cancer in rodents. And granted, it is a rodent study. There is also something that just came out this week on, it does look like that exposure to smoke in some people does increase the risk of cancer significantly, quite a bit. It obviously can cause premature death and disease in children and adults. When we talk about here in Michigan, we have about between 18,000 to 19,000 people die in Michigan due to their own smoking every year. But we also have about 3,500 to 4,200 people who die from secondhand smoke exposure. So it is causing, it does have effect on those who aren't. Now I want to tell you a little story about the immediate effects of heart and blood circulation. You know, med students are poor. They're always looking for money. So they did this really interesting study. Only med students would do this. They took a little room and they had cigarettes going in there. The med students would go in and there were just these cigarettes. No one's smoking them. They're just sitting there lit. And the med students sat in there and did homework for an hour. Do you know what they found out with the cardiovascular system? That it was the same as if that person had smoked a pack of cigarettes in that 1 hour. That the closure in the cardiovascular system, the effects on blood oxygen, all of these effects as if they had just been exposed and sitting in the room. Now, some of you might say, well, that's not really a fair thing to talk about because they were in a little room. But let's face it, when you're in a restaurant or when you're in your homes, or at someone's homes, are you in a big, huge cathedral? No, you're in a small space, relatively small space as well, and concentration of cigarette smoke. So the bottom line, there's no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. What would you do if I could give you a pill that made you feel better when you were sad, made you happier when you were happy, pepped you up when you were feeling slow, slowed you down when you were feeling revved up, helped you concentrate and focus, and it suppressed your appetites for sugars? Would y'all take that pill? Let me ask you this, is there anyone here who would not? Okay, I thought so.